A 2021 Bureau of Justice Statistics study found that 66% of people released from prisons in 24 states in 2008 were rearrested or engaged in recidivism within 3 years. And after a decade, after 10 years passed, 82% of individuals who were released in 2008 were rearrested. Welcome to Uniquely Mia's Criminal Justice 101 Perspective and Policies class. I hope you're excited. This is our week 2 module. I hope you have your textbook out, also known as a notebook, just to write out your notes. Our textbook for this class is subsequent videos. In this video, we will be going over recidivism. I will specifically tell you guys the definition of recidivism, current recidivism rates in the United States, factors that contribute to high recidivism rates, and factors that can be implemented within correctional facilities, also known as prisons and jails, to decrease recidivism rates. So as I said in the previous video, the goal of the United States criminal justice system when offenders are incapacitated is to provide just deterrence, specific and general deterrence for the offender and people in society. It's to provide revenge for the victim, and it's essentially to punish offenders for their crime. So when we look at those three main goals of the criminal justice system, rehabilitation is in there as well. And rehabilitation, the success of prison, the success of rehabilitation is measured by recidivism rates. So what does recidivism mean? Recidivism simply means reoffending. So once an offender goes to prison, when they're released, if they commit a crime again, that's reoffending. If somebody goes to prison for a felony, if they're released and they commit a crime for a misdemeanor, that individual essentially reoffended. They engaged in recidivism. And we don't want recidivism rates to be high in the United States or any country that uses the criminal justice system to, specifically prisons and jails, to incapacitate individuals. Because when recidivism rates are high, it shows that the criminal justice system isn't working. It's showing us that offenders are committing crimes, they're being incarcerated in prisons or jails for a short amount of time or a long amount of time, and essentially they're not receiving rehabilitative treatment when they're in prison. So when they come out, it's like nothing happened. They were just away on vacation, even though prison's not a vacation or a jail's not a vacation. They were just locked up, but they didn't engage in any rehabilitative activities so that they have the skills and the coping mechanisms necessary so they don't commit crimes in the future. So one academic journal article by Dr. Reese found that there's something known as the Housing First, HF program, and this program essentially provides housing for homeless individuals immediately when needed without any strings attached. Programs such as this are good because one population in prison, it's not the largest population, but it definitely makes up a percentage of individuals imprisoned, are homeless individuals. Most homeless individuals, they will commit crimes, whether that's misdemeanor crimes or in the severe case of felony, because it's better for them to be in prison rather than being outside free in society, because when they're in prison, they don't have to pay for anything. They get their food for free, they get housing for free, they get medical treatments for free, and sometimes they'll get activities to engage in for free. Whereas when they're outside in modern society, a homeless individual, they don't get food for free. They're living outside in the cold if they can't get access to a shelter. They don't have any activities. They don't have clean clothes. They don't have access to free health care. So when you're in the mindset of a homeless individual being in prison or in jail, it's probably a better experience for them. So these programs, such as Housing First programs, allows homeless individuals to see there's another option for me, and they can get these basic necessities to survive for free. There's also something known as a housing voucher program, HVT, and this assists parolees with in finding stable housing and a generally state-funded vouchers to pay for rent at least for 3 months. Programs such as this are also very important, because when individuals are imprisoned, when they're released, they're not like immediately released and like, oh, you're free to go. Generally they're on parole, whether that's for 6 months to a year to 5 years to 20 years. They're on some type of parole, and when individuals are on parole, they have to check in with a parole officer. They generally have to get a job, prove that they have a job, obtain housing, and sometimes it can be really difficult for new parolees to obtain jobs, because employers have a stigma saying you're not reliable or they're dangerous individuals, I don't want to hire them, or maybe they're not qualified, so they're not getting jobs easily. And when they have to go out and pay for rent and they don't have the money to, they can hang around negative people who got them in prison in the first place. And ultimately, this can lead to engaging in recidivism for individuals. So the main thing about it, when we think of recidivism rates in modern society, the main way to decrease recidivism starts in correctional facilities. And we want to do this by providing offenders with rehabilitative activities. We want to provide offenders with opportunities where they can further their education, so they can get professional certificates, maybe their GED, a form of a high school diploma, or maybe even if they're in like a prison that has a lot of funding, they can get their college degree depending on how long they're incarcerated for. And all this will ultimately benefit them, because when they're released back into society, they're qualified for jobs. When individuals are released back into society, it's required that they have to disclose that they were incapacitated or in prison. And so it's been recommended by some researchers that having not requiring offenders to do that could be beneficial, because they're able to obtain jobs, so the employee doesn't have the stigma on them saying, oh, this person was in prison, I'm not going to hire them. While in prison, we also want to provide offenders with treatment that treats their criminogenic needs. And when I say criminogenic needs, I mean what caused them to commit a crime. Did they experience some type of trauma when they were a child or an adult that most likely was a contributing factor to leading them to engage in criminal activities? Did they have, or did the offender suffer from alcoholism, or maybe drug addiction, or a mental health condition that they weren't receiving treatment for? So we want to make sure that these offenders go through an assessment where they're getting to determine if they have a mental health condition, a form of a substance addiction, or etc., so they can receive treatment like that. So McKenna and Holfeder in 2020 wrote an academic journal article about trauma-informed courts, and it found that the prison experience for inmates is an environment of trauma, an environment that has extreme emotional and psychological distressors. It has no sense of safety for offenders, and this no sense of safety can cause extreme stress to result among offenders, which can cause them to develop these mental health conditions. Procedural justice, and this is an idea that we're going to treat offenders fair, and this procedural justice is very important, especially when offenders are going through the criminal justice process or in prison. We're essentially giving these offenders the opportunity for their voices to be heard. We're approaching them with a neutral mindset, and they're being treated with dignity and respect, because sometimes when offenders are incarcerated or just going through the criminal justice system for the first time, and there's that idea, innocent until proven guilty, correctional officers, it's sometimes difficult for them to treat offenders with respect or neutrality or dignity. And I think this often relates to the level of education, because in some states, to become a correctional officer, you just have to receive like your high school diploma or like your college degree, depending on the state in which you live. And that's not, I don't think that's high enough, in my opinion, for correctional officers. I feel like the education level should be raised, and or correctional officers should be mandated to go through more training revolving around how to engage in neutrality, the importance of mental health condition, the importance of treating people fairly. But it's often difficult to do that because if they were to raise the education requirement, the government would have to increase the pay that correctional officers would receive, and they're not willing to do that. And then people in society, we're often not willing. We don't want to work in that environment with offenders, just because I said the extreme psychological stresses that it can have for people, and it's a very scary environment. Something known as the risk needs responsivity model emerged by researchers. This risk needs responsivity model, also known as RNR, emerged in the 1990s, and it was the development of psychological, like people from the psychology field and criminal justice field. They came together creating this RNR model to ultimately reduce recidivism. And for the most part, when implemented correctly, it does achieve that goal of reducing recidivism rates. So it has three main parts. So first, we're looking at the risk principle. And this risk principle is essentially saying that we're looking at high to moderate individuals or offenders. And we're saying these individuals should be prioritized to receiving more structured, more intensive treatment and control programs to maximize their outcome. And it's saying low risk people should be prioritized when their criminogenic needs are high. And then the needs principle is saying factors that can be changed is what we're focusing on. And factors that can be changed is criminogenic needs. So factors such as drug, mental health condition, alcohol addiction, education, things like these. If we provide individuals with treatment for their mental health condition, drug addiction, education, that falls in the needs principles. However, with that risk principles, we're looking at the type of crime. Did this person commit murder? Did they commit high-level assault? Things like that. We're going to look at that crime, and we're going to try to treat them for that crime by taking a deep dive into their life and providing treatment based on that. Responsivity is often used by a cognitive behavior approach, and this is often found to be most effective in reducing recidivism. So we're looking at the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and sometimes medication can be administered for offenders to implement these treatment, but oftentimes, once again, it's very difficult to do that because criminal justice system, we can train correctional officers to provide offenders with these treatment, but we're not sure. It's not a guarantee that correctional officers will implement these treatments, R&R treatments, correctly and fully to offenders. And then again, if we were thinking to hire an outside individual, like an outside psychologist or a counselor, perhaps we can do that, but we're not going to get enough because a lot of individuals won't be willing to work in that prison environment just because of the low pay grade and like the dangerous environment. So the main thing that we can do in society to decrease recidivism, we can provide education towards offenders. And once they're on parole, they're overseen by parole officers. These parole officers can often engage in the social role worker, where they're focused on providing this rehabilitation to the offenders. They're more acting like a welfare officer, where they're concerned in addressing the patient's needs and helping them adjust to the community. When this is often common when probation officers act in this welfare social worker role. However, it's difficult to do this because probation officers are overworked most of the time. So 9 times out of 10, they're acting in accordance to that punitive or law enforcement role, where they're focused on just telling the parolee or the newly released offender what to do. This is what you have to do, and they're not focused on helping them 100%. Well, we have something known as the First Step Act of 2018, and this First Step Act, it was an act that was implemented essentially to lower recidivism rates among individuals, and they did this by providing more funding to federal prisons. And with this funding, federal prisons implemented more opportunities for offenders to further their education, to engage in faith-based groups such as religious groups, to implement more mental health treatment among offenders, and etc., to help them rehabilitate. correctly, this FSA, the First Step Act, it also created something known as earned time credits, which allowed eligible people in federal prisons to earn credits for participation in rehabilitation programs and activities. They also expanded the idea of good time credits, and this is where individuals in federal prisons can earn good time credits for good behavior, which can sometimes decrease the sentence that they have to spend in prisons. There's also something known as amending the compassionate release. So this is saying people with severe illnesses, or if they're extremely old and they pose little risk to the community, they can potentially take their case to a federal judge and they can be released early just because of the circumstances. This FSA Act has also been used to decrease the amount of individuals, female individuals who are pregnant, decrease their presence in prisons, and decrease the number of births that has been present in prisons. However, despite the success of this First Step Act, there has concerns about the implementation, because it's often challenged to implement it, to either making sure that the people who should receive credits for good behavior, or people who have that severe mental health condition, or who are elderly, get out of prison, to ensure that the Bureau of Prisons are providing adequate rehabilitative services or programs to offenders. Oftentimes, this has been a failure. And the main component of this First Step Act, it retroactively is supposed to reduce the length of individuals who were in prison for certain offenses, such as drug offenses. However, various courts like the 7th Circuit, the 11th Circuit, they are not consistent in administrating or retroactively reducing the sentence of an offender fairly and or consistently, guys. But the FSA Act is definitely an act to look at, because it has been used to essentially promote the rehabilitation and positive programs for offenders within the prison environment, guys. That was an overview of recidivism rates in America, along with the FSA Act of 2018 that was passed to try to decrease recidivism rates and encourage more rehabilitative treatment among offenders. Your question for this week is, what do you think should be done to lower recidivism rates in society? And were you surprised about anything that you learned about? Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Welcome back if you are a new student. Thank you for your continued support. We had over 200 people enroll, so that is awesome. If you still want to secure a seat, make sure to follow along, like the video, and save it. And I'll see you soon. Bye, guys. Have a great day.